What is the problem with solo leadership? Like, what kind of pathologies does it lead to? Yeah, what paint the picture for why we shouldn't be desiring this solo leader. What happens when we do that?
I think that there are two approaches to why naming the problem. One is the thing that, if most of the listeners here are leaders, then we are completely honest with ourselves. We already know that, okay, we have to tend to our desires. As simple as that. Most of the time, there's like 3 points of our desires, right? We want to the person in control. We want to have draw a crowd around us, and or
Yes.
we want to make our contributions, so the work that we've done, our experiences, all the letters that we get in the back of our names, we want that to gain us some sort of authority, right? And so those are usually underlying desires that come from our desire for power, popularity, or productivity.
Hi there, Faith Roundtable listeners and viewers. Guys, thanks so much for jumping on and joining us for another great episode of the Faith Roundtable, where we talk to Christian leaders, theologians, thought leaders, people at the forefront and the front lines of the issues going on in the church today and theology today, and all things Christianity around the world, just trying to figure out what's going on and how we can move forward. And of course, I'm Josh Burtram. I'm your host here, and I'm the faithful host of the Faithful Politics podcast. Happens here on the same channel and everything. So make sure you guys are liking and subscribing, hacking the algorithm for us so we can keep getting this great content out to you. And today is going to be no less of a great experience. We have the pleasure of having Reverend Dr. Unke Strawser. She is the co-vocational pastor of Make'aloo. Wait. What you said it and I had it in my mind. I know you told me not to do this whole thing, but Make'aloo. There you go, dude. I did it, which means presence in Hawaiian. She's also the founder of the Iwa Collaborative, consulting content development firm to empower kingdom-grounded leaders to navigate change, grow adaptive capacity, and foster local flourishing. She's a physician. She's a pastor. She's so many different things. And obviously an author of Centering Discipleship, which is a previous book. And now You're Never Meant to Lead Alone. And thank you so much for coming on the program, sharing some wisdom with us today about leading alone. I really appreciate, can't wait to dive into this with you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Josh. Well, actually, truth be told, the real title that I really wanted was just Power of Sharing Leadership. But, publishers do a way better job on marketing and writing titles. So You Were Never Meant to Lead Alone felt really vulnerable to me, because that's the question that I wish someone would tell me, that, did you know that you were never meant to lead alone? Because all I really wanted to talk about was power dynamics, why sharing leadership is really the thing, is it the antidote to all the things that drive us crazy about leadership, church leadership, leadership in general. But I felt very thankful, grateful actually for IVP to be like, actually, I think that people really wanted to know with great assurance is that, did you know that you were never meant to lead alone? And that there is therefore power of sharing leadership. That's really the whole story of the title.
I really love it, actually. I love the idea. And I would love to just dig right into this and just throw out this question to you. Why were we never meant to lead alone? I got the John Wayne, I got the strong man idea in my mind of the person. They're emotionless. They never get flustered. They're all good. Why is it that we are supposed to never lead alone? Why are you saying this?
Yeah, I actually think that it's like human nature that we want to lead alone. Trust me, I would be the first person in line to be like,
Yes.
when hierarchical leadership works and you have a person who is gracious, who is super smart, very competent, super funny, right? on point, on trend at that top of that ladder, you want to be led by these people, right? Most of the
Yes.
time, leadership dynamics it does serve a purpose. People want to feel really safe. And a lot of times, these more quote unquote domineering, but dominant leaders who are competent, make fast decisions, clear decisions, give delegations of tasks. We want those kinds of leaders because most of the time we want to follow people who make us safe. On the other side, psychology will say this is you only have two choices in leaders in society: the dominant ones who make us feel safe, or it's the ones who are dynamic. We want dynamic leaders. Why? Because they are the people who make us feel special. If that is the only reason why people want to be following somebody or a group or an organization or a company or whatever it is, right? If we only really want to follow somebody because we want somebody else to make us feel safe or to feel special, I think as Christians, we're going to miss the point that really only God should be the one taking that space. Right? It really has more to do with, does our discipleship answer the questions around our safety? Does discipleship and following Jesus actually answer the question around how do we feel unique or of value? Those kinds of things. Outside of that, when we remove ourselves from those kind of questions, then I think, okay, hierarchical leadership should not be the thing that's working in Christendom. The thing that should be working is sharing leadership. And my biggest proof in the pudding is because the first century church started out that way, that it wasn't hierarchical. It wasn't that Jesus left the church to one person. He didn't groom
Right.
one leader for over 3 years of ministry. Most of the time, if you're founding a leader in a Christian organization, you don't just groom for 3 years and pass it off. You groom for 10 years. And then you find the right leader, and then you try to do a good job transitioning that authority and power over, but he didn't. He took 3 years and a group of people, and he really paid attention more so than any other thing, not on delegation of task or operations or how to do structures really well within community. He really, really talked so vividly about how do we care for one another, how we treat one another. So if that is the impetus for how Christians, churches actually started, then it is something that we ought to be paying attention to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's our culture is so individualistic in America, right? That in the West, that obviously community is still important to people, and yet somehow we don't know how to share leadership many times in community. And I would love for you, before we dig into even like how we do that and the methods that we go through, what would be like, let's dig even more into the problem. What is the problem with solo leadership? Like, what kind of pathologies does it lead to? Yeah, paint the picture for why we shouldn't be desiring this solo leader. What happens when we do that?
Yeah, I think that there are two approaches to naming the problem. One is the thing that, if most of the listeners here are leaders, and we all, when we are completely honest with ourselves, we already know that, okay, we have to tend to our desires. As simple as that. Most of the time, there's like 3 points of our desires, right? We want to be the person in control. We want to have draw a crowd around us, and
Yes.
or we want to make our contributions, so the work that we've done, our experiences, all the letters that we get in the back of our names, we want that to gain us some sort of authority, right? And so those are usually underlying desires that come from our desire for power, popularity, or productivity. Name me one leader who has not been tempted by any combination of those three
Of course. Of course.
desires, right? And that's okay. That's a human nature part. I think the problem in Christian leadership is because that's one part of the problem, but the other part is the congregation, is the church. Because we want those leaders that either make us feel super special, unique, or feel really, really safe. They visit us all the time. Anytime they're sick, I don't know why, they have a sixth sense and you need to call. Those kinds of things. But we don't empower these leaders who are coming in to have any way to bring about some sort of challenge or change. As soon as a lead pastor or any pastor comes in a new environment, if they don't take the year to examine and observe and do that careful work. But as soon as they bring about some sort of change or some sort of challenge to the congregation oftentimes, more often than not, we want to demonize that leader. And so if there is this power struggle in many ways around what the congregation desires, what people who follow desire, and what are those desires from the leader, I think you have to kind of address both and reconcile both. It is really naming and calling out not just the leaders. It is naming and calling out, what do churches want? If churches really, really want in 5 years' time a leader who will help them to think through their significance and why their church exists on the street that it resides in, if that's the question that they want to answer, please bring about the challenge and change. Everybody would be expecting it. But that's not what most churches desire in a leader. They want a person who's going to care for them, like that shepherd-hearted guy or girl, right? They want that father figure met in their lives, right? Or they want to feel pretty smart. I want you to knowledge dump on me every single week, and you have to do it better than a podcast, do it better than a YouTube video, do it better than a book that I just read. That's the leader that they want, right? Or they want somebody who's going to be like a lot of riz, a lot of charisma up on stage. That's what's going to draw the crowds, right? Like they want to be a part of that feeling of a growing sense of some sort of mosh pit happening. If we're kind of say point blank, that's probably what people really, really desire. But no one's really thinking about, is this leader going to actually make us more missional? Is this leader actually going to make our entire community, our faith community, something where the neighborhood or city or town that it sits in, they will care deeply if this church disappeared? Thanos comes and does the snap and it disappears, right? The church disappears. Will that city or town or neighborhood actually care, right? On the flip side, I also ask the question of churches, will the church, if the Thanos snap happened and the city or neighborhood that the church resides in, if that disappeared, will the church care? So if the leader isn't helping to answer that question about why is existence of your faith community matter to the neighborhood or city or town that it resides in, if they're not helping to answer that question, I think that we're probably answering the wrong questions around leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really, really good. One thing that fascinates me about your book, well, many things, but thinking about the solo leadership, you diagnose three, at least in the work, three pathologies that come: weariness, loneliness, and domination. So the leader gets weary, they're burnt out, they're lonely, no one else is there, and then maybe the bitterness or whatever leads to that. Are those like, how do you see those connected? Weariness, loneliness, and domination? And which of these do you feel and have you experienced most viscerally? Like where you observed this and you said that this caused such destruction, or I just seen this in people I know and it creates issues.
I'll do like the AA thing and tell you my personal thing to just be like, hey, we've all done this, right? And
I get that.
I think that I'm a super high capacity person. People should put me at the top of the totem pole in making decisions. I make great decisions. People love me. I can draw a crowd around, all those kinds of things. So I know that in my heart of hearts, the thing that probably my church would be like, oh, I can't believe you said that, right? It's not the weariness or loneliness. I fear that I would become a really domineering leader because I trust myself a lot and I have earned and gained the trust of so many people around me. And so I am one of those people where I'm just like, yeah, I did all this stuff. I have a lot of initials behind my name. You know what I mean? And so people already know I must be an expert, blah, 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 those kinds of things. And so I know that my biggest desire or temptation is that I'm just like one fence over being a dominant leader. And so I know one of the ways that I catch myself on that, because I know that it could happen, even though nobody around me would believe me, right? But it could happen, is just because I am a high capacity leader and I personally run fast, I don't expect that to happen with my own congregation or my own leadership who God has given me to lead and love, right? If I'm constantly aware of that there is a value in patience. There is a huge value in pacing myself so that other people are actually coming behind, right? I'm not going to win anything if I go and win this race all by myself and everybody else is like, thousands of meters behind me. I'm not going to win anything, right? The win is, I always get this picture from Jesus when I'm praying about this, because this is evident in my life. And I'm just like, I always get this picture, it like makes me cry. I'm opening a door and I'm just flailing everybody to come through this door. And my job is to just keep that door open and keep waving everyone through, right? And I feel like if I know that that's the thing that Jesus wants me to pay attention to in my own leadership, then one of the things is I'm going to pay attention to my pacing. I multiply by 3, whatever I think is a time value of something to get done. I multiply it by 3. Probably in general is like the way to love my people really well. And I'm going to be the last one to get through that door.
I really, really like that. One of the things you write about is that hierarchical leadership has a short shelf life in post-Christendom. What kind of signaled that for you, that this old model, it's fading and it's really not working?
Yeah, I think that the great resignation that's happening in the corporate world is beginning to happen in the church world. And so we've already been seeing that, right? Prior to the pandemic, the churches, all churches, Christianity Today published a report where in the past 50 years prior to the pandemic, it's following every Christian denomination in the United States and Judaism and Islam. And every single faith tradition was either flatlined already or on a decline, right? If that's happening prior to the pandemic and in a large scope, we've lost a third of attendees. Throughout the pandemic and now post-pandemic, we are left with only a third. If you're a church that has 65 persons coming on a Sunday morning worship service, you're doing great. If you have 20% of your Sunday morning worship service attendees who has joined a small group, which usually means 65 means you have one small group, you're doing great. Those are the statistics right now. If you look at the number of the age point of who is planting churches now, and they are all Gen Xers. They're not millennials. They're not Gen Zers, but statistically speaking, it's Gen Xers, right? Are the ones who are wanting to plant, probably because they have resources, right? And things and time. If that's happening, then we already know that the great resignation in the church has already started. If we're the church usually, in the American church usually is like trailing what corporate world is doing. So my hope is that because the corporate world has since learned that hierarchical leadership nor flat leadership works well, even in business bottom line and all those kinds of things. If a generation of millennials and below, Gen Zers, and even these weird Gen Alphas, I know, I love the Gen Alphas. I'm raising a Gen Alpha, and
I'm pretty sure
our
I am too.
youngest. These weirdos, right? No, I love them. I
Yes.
have 3 kids. We have 2 Gen Zers and 1 Gen Alpha, and it's such a difference in their generations. But I'm like, if I'm thinking about a future church, I have to include these people, and these are the kids and young men and women who want something very, very different, a different kind of leadership. They want to have input. They want to resign from any place, community, business, work, if they're not included, their opinions aren't being asked, right? They're not the folks who just want to come and spectate. They want to participate. These are the generations that are participating probably way more in social science fields, in what's happening in the community, and they're looking for leaders who actually care about the community and have a pulse on what's happening worldwide. If that's the case about what the future church will look like, leaders right now should be paying attention to them, right? And so, yeah, I think that thinking through that the great resignation is also happening in the church today is just a reality we are living in. It's not the thing about, I do a lot of consultations for churches, and usually the number one question is, how do I get these young families to come to my church? I want to do this exciting event or this thing, and I'm like, wow, I bet that you probably can't get them into this building, but I bet you can move to where they're already at and start beginning to ask questions around what is God doing already outside of the church right now that these people want to be a part of. Go figure that out. I bet that there is an answer to that question in every single city, town, or neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, I really, really, really like that. We started a church in Richmond 5 years ago, and it's supposed to be a house church network. We started in our house. We were trying to get in another house. It didn't work out. There's some issues personnel issues. And then we had we started meeting at another time in our house, but it was too much. The idea of getting like burned out very much. I understand very much. I get that. I'm not the dominating leader as much as I am the one who probably commits to too much, and then it doesn't work out the way. And I definitely have felt that sense of like, man, the burnout, the sense, how are people gonna, like, how are we gonna get them to come in here? Because we always like, from the beginning, I was like, I don't want to just get a bunch of other Christians. I want to have mission. And that has been exceedingly hard, to have mission that's just reaching people that don't know Christ or that are on like the edges or whatever it is. And it's like, you need people that are committed Christians to help build this church. And you also want people that, don't know Christ, and you're praying for the power of God to spread through the evangelism and spiritual conversations. And it's been a grind. And it's like, it's weird because on the one hand, it feels like, and I don't know what you think about this pattern, if you've seen it, but it seems like all these churches, right, have closed. The pandemic, like you said, a third of people, NONES, the nuns are growing, right? That we've seen people leaving the church. They're not doing it. They don't want to be a part of it. Evangelical movements. We've had people on the podcast that have talked about this. I wrote a book, Evangelical, one of them. And I guess like looking at this, like all these people have left, and then all these churches have closed. And so some churches continue to grow. Some big churches continue to grow a lot. And a lot of churches, like, because you're saying, hey, if you have 65, you're doing good. I mean, we're below that, and it's just difficult to get things going, and it has been a grind. And then you look at some churches growing, and you're like, what's going on with them? How come they're growing so much? And yet at the same time, right, that's probably because they're transferring from another place, from another church. And so I guess, what are your thoughts on that? Like in terms of like genuine growth of the church right now, and how does this shared leadership in your mind, how does it help foster that?
Yeah, no, yeah, growth and numbers is probably one of like the top questions, right? Because people also want to ask me is if we shift or restructure in some way so that sharing leadership is realized within our church, will that contribute to an increase a growth in attendance, right? Those kinds of things, right? And so I'm like, yeah, you have to be really, really clear about what metrics you are using. Otherwise, you may be examining the wrong thing. I think the note on the transfer of Christians to contribute to the growth of a church, I am all for it. Post pandemic, honestly, is a free pass for everybody. If the post pandemic season is allowing evangelicals or deconstructing Christians to still have that sense of a place of belonging to be met, and they're finding it in the church where they have a lot of an anonymity because of the size, that's okay. This is the season that people are in and need, and that's okay. But I think then after that time of recouping and recovering from a really, really hard season, right? I mean, the pandemic just threw everything off the shelf, right? It really is like a lot of sociologists, psychologists really believe that it's going to take about 100 years for humanity to recover from what we just experienced, right? If you take the same thing from, the plagues that wiped out Rome twice, it took about 100 years for humanity to recover from all of it. So if that's a reality of it, then like there are lots of people who are weary, and there are lots of people who have just experienced going through a season where they got to be very choosy about what they want to participate in. And they got to be very choosy, even if it's going to be addictions or abstaining from things or avoiding things. We mastered that throughout the pandemic, right? If that is the portrait of the American Christian today, then I don't blame people if they want a little bit of anonymity and less quote unquote work to do. But I think the question is, if you want a community that is going to start out like a mustard seed and grow to be the mustard tree parable, right, is supposed to tell us a picture of what the kingdom of God is like. And the kingdom of God is supposed to grow to become the biggest tree that's going to bring flourishing for its entire environment. If that is a portrait of what we want a Christian faith community to look like, then I think that we would be asking different questions, not just how can we help to heal, what do we do next? After we provide intentional healing of recovering for Christians who just went through the pandemic, how do we actually help them to be equipped in a way where they're going to go and serve their neighbors? How do we give them bite-sized pieces so that they know to practice what it means to have social competence like Jesus and not just constantly get self-fed with spiritual confidence, which the church does pretty well. And if you're a growing church, you're probably excelling at that. But if you are not pairing equipping God's people in not just spiritual competence, but tethering that to social competence, do they know and a lot about Jesus, or do they know Jesus? But is it tethered to, do they live like Jesus? If you don't have that second part, you can grow a lot of things and you're going to create a lot of safety for these people and having them to feel special, but it's not going to equate to anything else. People won't live like Jesus if you're not intentional about it. I think sharing leadership comes into play because we also in American Christendom live in celebrity culture, because, social media helped to push that even more, right? We love celebrity pastors. They make us feel really good.
Yes.
They challenge us, right? They comfort us, those kinds of things. They challenge us from a distance. Sorry, that's my little, they challenge us from a distance. They convict us from a distance, right? They care for us from a distance, all those kinds of things. But the celebrity church leader culture really keeps at bay what a community can do up close. That's the problem right now, right? And so sharing leadership makes it so that your congregation, your community, they have lots of a variety of models of that person is following Jesus, so I'm going to follow them like they're following Jesus. And that person, right? If you do that, you actually present a fuller picture of Jesus, not just the portrait of the white evangelical church, not the portrait of the American church, the post-Christendom American church. You're not doing that. You're trying to have a clear portrait of who Jesus is, and not one person can singularly contain that. You need a shared leadership structure that actually tells your whole church and community, actually, this is what Jesus is like. You think I'm patient? Oh my gosh. When you experience Melly's patience or Mars's patience or Timmy's patience, okay, you're actually going to experience the patience of Christ, right? It's kind of like that. I would bank on that. I would bank on the fact that I cannot solely present to people and to community and congregation the full portrait of who Christ is.
Yeah, I really think that's insightful. Thinking about the way that the leadership is supposed to work, you talk about this kind of inner life progression from humility to honor to hospitality to hope. I would love for you to kind of help us understand that more. How are these things connected? Humility, honor, hospitality, hope. How does one build on the other? Because that's kind of one of the things you're saying, is that humility leads to honor, leads to hospitality, leads to hope. Help us understand that progression and how that shows up in shared leadership.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It really is trying to think through. The first question in my mind was, if we want to share leadership, you have to have mature leaders. Most of the time in the church, our leadership pipelines, again, this takes a lot of self-examination, a lot of honesty, right? And a lot of humility to go through this process. This is probably one of the works that I do with churches, so that they get to an honest conversation about themselves, right? But most of the time, leadership pipelines are just, how do we funnel people to be the worship pastor or a teaching pastor? Those are the two main funnels for it. And that's a different skill set, different kind of giftings, right? If you can't sing, you can't be a worship pastor, period. If you're not instrumentally gifted, you can't be a worship pastor, right? You have to be a good orator. You have to have communication skills, some sort of a personality. You can't just be like stone-faced, right? Like those are different kinds of leadership pipelines, and they're great. Except if you want to lead in the church, really, is that what you want to look for in what a mature leader or a gifted leader is? For me, I need somebody who's willing to share power. And who are the people who are willing to share power? So those 4 H's, or those 4 marks of a mature leader that I'm looking for or watching as they are developing in, I think it starts with humility. You can also, in the book, I trace it scripturally also. And then obviously, because the podcast can't do all of this, but in the book, I also put in some designs and suggestions on how you can actually implement this into practice so they can identify leaders. But it starts with humility because it has to do with people's identity. It's not about thinking, it's like what Tim Keller says, right? Humility isn't about thinking less of yourself. It's about thinking of yourself less, right? There's a difference in that. So it's a person who's like constantly like, okay, I am not the first person that I'm going to be thinking about. The other way to mark each of these marks of maturity is what I call, so kenosis is the maturity marker, the thing that's leading us to a step towards self-emptying or self-giving love. Its antecedent is harpagmos, or what am I grasping for myself? So if you're looking for a person who's humble, you'll also be looking for people who are not trying to gain things for selfish gain or selfish ambition, right? Those are the two side by side. Humility, when people are thinking of themselves less, leads to, it's really the people who then develop this gift of honoring other people, or thinking of others more, or thinking more of others, right? Honor is such a key part of being a Christian leader, because it's the people who are going to be like really maintaining the dignity and value of other people's identity in Christ, other people's image bearer gift that every single person possesses, right? So it's the people who are like the first to celebrate other people, right? Dishonor, on the flip side, are the people who are going to like gossip, talk a lot of trash about people behind their backs, right? I'm like, oh, you're literally disqualified from leadership of any sort if you're going to do that, right? Then if you're already starting from a point of you have a strong identity in Christ, and therefore you think of yourself less often, that brings up to you honoring other people and thinking more of others. What would you do by nature? Then you're going to be the person who exhibits hospitality, which means you're gifted in making space for other people. You understand that work of you're there as a leader to make space, create safe spaces, but make space for other people. Its opposite is going to be the person who probably takes up a lot of space. It doesn't mean you don't ever not take up space as a leader, but it's the person who probably takes up a little too much space, is its opposite. So when I'm seeing that, I'm like, okay, that person is probably not that mature of a leader. They're not cognizant of the space. They're not thinking about how do they make and create and hold space for other people, especially folks who are like maybe nervous or by experience, ethnicity, culturally, traditionally are not used to taking up that much space. It's the person who's going to make that space for these people. And then lastly, it's the person who then creates a hope-filled environment. So the process of maturity, from that growth from humility, honor, hospitality, hope, the way you want to think about it is, what is that producing in the leader? And if you can't tell, then a really good way is to see its opposite. So humility, I'm looking for the person who is thinking of themselves less, not less of themselves, thinking of themselves less, because they're so busy thinking about God, thinking about other people. They really exhibit the self-giving love. Its opposite is really, or harpagmos, right? Grasping for yourself. You're really going to take for yourself. The not humble leader is a person who's going to be doing things out of a motivation of selfish ambition. And then if you have a person who's so humble that they constantly are living a life of self-giving love, self-emptying, these are probably the people who are the fastest to honor other people. The behavior I look for is, are they celebrating other people instead of the harpagmos is they envy other people. They gossip about the person behind their back because they're really actually dealing with envy or competition. Honor, if a person's constantly celebrating other people, that already, and scripturally that you can see this, they're the people who are the most hospitable, not the people who have like the best, cleanest house or make the best coffee. They're the people who are actually know how to make space for other people. They make environments where they are making space for other people. It's opposite of hospitality is they're the people who take up a lot of space. They're not aware of folks that other people exist. They take up a lot of space in either the work or of communications or energy or emotions or any of those kinds of things, right? There are people who are not aware of how do you create space, how does space work in environments when you're working with other people. And then lastly, hope is a big thing because I need a leader who aren't having wishful thinking, but who have the long game of perseverance. And you know it's opposite because it's a leader who will fall into despair. If a leader falls into despair very quickly, especially in these kinds of trying times where things are so in such turmoil all the time, if they don't have that wise practice built in, it's not wishful thinking, but they're the people who will draw out a nature of perseverance that is necessary for hope. Once a leader despairs, the entire congregation will begin to despair.
Man, that's really insightful. And I totally see that. I mean, it's amazing how much the leader affects the culture and everything of the church. Now, I'm interested when we're doing the shared leadership. How does the lead pastor work in this model? What is the role of the lead pastor? What do they do? Is there a lead pastor? How does this actually kind of flesh itself out in the context of the local church?
Yeah, no, that's great. As much as in my take off the Christian hat, and what I really love, the leadership style is hierarchical leadership because it's the clearest to me, and everybody loves that because it's clear, right? When I put my Christian hat back on and I'm thinking about it, make it really clear, sharing leadership is not flat leadership. Let's say that again. Sharing leadership is not flat leadership. It doesn't mean there is one lead pastor and then every single other person has the same level of access, proximity, decision-making power, all those kinds of things. That nothing will ever get done. Again, if we borrow from corporate world where they have tried to get rid of middle management in a growing company, because flat leadership somehow felt really good. It was an answer to domineering leadership, domineering hierarchical leadership. Flat leadership also doesn't work because a lot of decisions don't get made. A lot of it has more to do with taking care of everybody's ego. Really, we feel like we're taking care of each other's souls, but it's not. It's taking care of people's egos, and then it actually comes at the expense of movement forward together. So shared leadership is not flat leadership. A story from just my own church. This is my second church plant. We're 7 years in Hawaii. We grew from one, if anyone's following like missional community models, it started in the 90s. We probably are like a legitimate missional community model where it's a personal space tethered to a social space, or like a discipleship core tethered to an identified space of mission. We grew from one. So, our discipleship core is like 12 to 15 Jesus followers tethered to our identified space of mission. We took one neighborhood. Probably that first year we had like 50 folks come in. No invitations by mouth only. No PR being done. 7 years later, we have 12 of those in different locations. We do it network-based or neighborhood-based here on Oahu. So we serve about over 650 persons. The whole beautiful thing about this is that first year, all I did as the senior pastor was just make sure to disciple that core of people for one whole year. That's it. I wasn't the main person in that more visible space where we did community events or community gatherings. Like the outside world, the community would not really know that I have any higher leadership level than any of the other folks there on purpose. Because I needed to have a model that this thing can multiply really quickly and in a way where I don't have to lead in every single community. So that was intentional by design. Fast forward 7 years later, and my time as a senior pastor is divided into, we do monthly all missional community leaders. So these are all my top leaders. We have about 25. We do a monthly leadership meeting. It's super fun and super deep, and everybody loves it. It's like, this is the thing that everybody wants to come to. And I have time with my non-Jesus following friends. Those are my people time division 7 years later, doing a shared leadership model. Because I really wanted a shared leadership from the get-go, even as a senior pastor, I knew that delegating out significant tasks was important. And I knew that at every level in our church, there is at least an intention or already established a group of three. So once we started multiplying to different missional communities, we started building a teaching team because we didn't want that teaching or content load to be a burden on these leaders who are the best at relational and purposeful. They're great at building a sense of belonging. They're excellent at having a sense of purpose for the entire community to do missional work, right? If that's the case, then we needed a teaching team. So it's a group of three. We have a prayer team. These are the people who are establishing culture of prayer, deep connection with God, how to intercede for one another.
That makes a lot of sense to me. You know, what we have these traditional things that we track, and what kind of metrics now do you suggest that churches and churches, we'll just stick with that, track as they're developing shared leadership? That's really, really good. What kind of things do you think, like what kind of stories rather would you hear and you would think, hey, this book has accomplished its purpose because I'm hearing these stories, like these success stories, or maybe things you've already heard, experienced, and what do you hope to hear to show you that the book is accomplishing the purpose you set out for it? I really appreciate that story. It's pretty amazing, actually, to have a church do that. That's so rare, not just, I'm sure, in that denomination, but around the world for churches or any leaders to really like want to share leadership like that. So it's a super encouraging story. I really appreciate that. You know, people who are listening and they're wondering what are some of my next steps. Maybe there's a pastor listening. Maybe there's someone they heard it, they go to church and they love for their pastor to hear it, or some of their church leaders. What are some next steps that you would recommend for them from this book? And you know, and how can they connect with what you guys are doing in your ministry, if that's possible? I love that. Is there any place on social media that you would recommend that people follow you and connect with you outside of your website? Awesome. Thank you so much. And this has been a really challenging conversation for me, and a really really inspiring. I mean, it's, you know, the work that you guys are doing is a lot like what I want us to do here in Richmond. And, you know, I feel like we've kind of we've gotten off mission, and I think that this is really encouraging for me to think about and think, how can we start to implement this stuff again, like in a way that's been proven and organized and things like that, so that, you know, we're getting the kind of results that we have been praying for, and that my wife and I moved, you know, halfway across the country to do. And it's like, this is really what we want. We want people to know Jesus, to experience the power of community. And I don't know, it's been really cool to hear about it. So thank you for coming and spending some time with me and with us and just giving us your insight. Really appreciate it. Really, that would be amazing. We'll have to make that happen for real. Yes, that would be awesome, actually. So thank you again, and thank you to our viewers and our watchers. And make sure you guys are getting on, looking at the show notes. We're going to put all the links so you can get to Dr. Eun's book very quickly, and all the websites and everything that she's put up. And guys, thank you for joining us, and we really appreciate it. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks, and God bless.